When you think about Hitachi Vantara and Hitachi storage, the one thing that keeps up to them is availability and uptime. I mean, I've been in this company for about 3 months now, and I've talked to a lot of customers in the field. I mean, not one person's come back and said the product doesn't work. Uptime and performance is something that we are extremely great at. Reliability is something that's great at. Technology can be created, the newer innovations are coming into play, but all of this is created by one thing: the human power. So the talent is the most important thing that we have to do. Worry about or keep track of, and nurturing the talent, making sure that we hire the right people. Whatever you do, put in the best effort. The outcome will happen. If you put in your best effort and you focus on that, you will get the right outcome. Make sure that you treat people the way you want to be treated, and then do the right thing.
This is CIONET TV. My name is Hendrik Deckers. I'm here today with Jay Subramanian, who's the GM for core storage platforms at Hitachi Vantara. A very warm welcome, Jay.
Thank you so much, Hendrik. Nice to meet you. Nice to be on this as well.
Jay, you are an engineer and you have an MBA. You studied at universities in Annamalai, India, and in Texas and in California. You spent a lot of your career at NetApp and at Pure Storage, and you joined in 2024 Hitachi Vantara. So Jay, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Who are you? What is your background? And how did you arrive in this position at Hitachi Vantara?
Yeah, I had my schooling in India, and I came to the United States in the late 80s, early 90s for my master's. And since then, I finished my master's and moved to California, and here I am after almost 30 years in California. In the meantime, initially I was an engineer, and I found myself I needed to have the big picture, so I went to do my MBA from Haas Berkeley, and that gave me a pretty broader picture in terms of what the business is. And I've had obviously great experiences with startups as well as with large companies, and one of the things that I relate very well with is what does the customer need? What is the problems that customers want for, and that's what drives me. At the end of the day, there's a lot of engineering that happens across the board, but at the same time, if we don't solve a particular problem, it doesn't become successful. So what drives me is driving to figure out what customer needs are and how do we make sure that we can meet the need. That's really what drives me. As a person, I mean, I'm pretty simple. I mean, I try to keep things simple. I'm fairly open and transparent. One of the things that I constantly hear from people that I work with is I bring a lot of passion and energy into the work. At the same time, I push people hard. At the same time, I push myself very hard. I'm a pretty determined person.
Great. Let's, in a nutshell, just to put the context around this, Hitachi Vantara, this company, what is it that they're really, really good at?
So when you think about Hitachi Vantara and Hitachi storage, the one thing that keeps up to them is availability and uptime. I've been in this company for about 3 months now, and I've talked to a lot of customers in the field. I mean, not one person has come back and said, Touchwood has come back and said the product doesn't work. Uptime and performance is something that we are extremely great at. Reliability is something that's great at. I've competed against them in the past, and that's uptime, performance, availability.
Okay, super. Jay, today I want to discuss with you the topic of mastering complexity. And thriving in the era of data explosion. I mean, CIOs and IT organizations, they're faced with an explosion of applications, of data sources, hybrid cloud environments. So from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that organizations face today as the IT complexity grows?
It's a combination of different things, diverse applications. There's so many newer applications, so many legacy applications. At the same time, there's also things that you have to bring the old versus the new. Distributed environments. Earlier, it used to be one particular place where people used to come to work. Now everybody's working from everywhere, and especially after COVID, it's been pretty much like you don't know where people are, and sometimes people work from the remotest of locations. We need to make sure that they have access to the applications. So the IT environment gets complex because you're dealing with a diverse, distributed environment, as well as also a sort of new and old. Legacy applications are still there. I mean, I still talk to customers that run their applications in mainframes. At the same time, people are running on in the cloud with microservices architecture. So that becomes very complex. And soon, if you're trying to do all of this stuff in the same thing and moving data and making sure that they have the right visibility across these diverse environments, creates the complexity.
And would you say that this complexity really impacts the efficiency of businesses? And and makes it all more complex to stay secure and to drive innovation?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the challenges of this, when you have an application, when you have a diverse environment like this, everybody has a unique need, and trying to meet different needs causes different problems. The challenge with the innovation is this: innovation has, by definition, has to happen faster, and things are coming up with new ideas and so forth. And at the same time, sometimes it's very, very kind of ad hoc. I'm going to use the word unstructured in this thing, because innovation is not something that you plan for. Innovation happens because you kind of have to think about this. Yes, you have to put in a lot of effort. At the same time, when you're dealing with all of these uncertain, unstructured ways of thinking about things, you also have to make sure that there's the right set of communication aspects have to happen, right set of structures put in place, without which there's going to be gaping holes across the board. That's where security problems come into play. All of those different things that cause these things is because you have to kind of balance between structured and unstructured ways of thinking. And that causes a conflict, because structured thinking kind of gives you, here's what you need to do, here's how things have to be done, here's the policies associated with it, how do we do compliance and so forth. Unstructured thinking is completely different, right? So bringing those two things together causes a lot of tension in the system and conflicts in the system. That's natural, but at the same time, unless you have that innovation, you're not going to move forward. Compared to where we were when I started my working experience to where we are today, I mean, things have completely changed. I mean, this conversation would not be happening like what we are doing today in the olden days. And I think that this is to a large degree pushing the envelope, pushing the limits of innovation in that context. And I think that's a good thing. Now, it causes lots of different problems. Security is one of them. Compliance is another one of them. You don't know where this is. So you also always have to keep constantly looking for ways to improve things. And that's where the continuous improvement things comes into play.
Okay, let's unpack this a little bit step by step. And so let's maybe talk first of one of the most important challenges today, and that's hybrid cloud. It's often seen as a solution. And it is a solution, but at the same time, it also adds complexity, right? So what is, in your mind, the key challenge that CIOs face when they need to manage hybrid cloud environments?
I think the biggest challenge is, are you being realistic about what do you mean by hybrid cloud, and how do you deploy applications in a hybrid mode, right? Because there's a lot of expectations at the very high levels, sometimes misplaced, where people are thinking about, I want to go put this in the cloud, and if I do this in the cloud, things will happen differently and so forth. But you have to be very realistic. You have to kind of think about what you want to put where. And I think it's absolutely important to plan ahead, so because there are going to be bumps in the road, and you have to kind of figure out what is the right way to do things. And sometimes putting some things in the cloud or putting in a hybrid environment is going to be impactful in a negative way. So we have to think about it from the perspective of, what is the objective? What is the primary objective that we are trying to solve for? What are we solving for? And we have to have a clear roadmap in terms of how do we do things. We have to plan a little bit in terms of things. Now, hybrid cloud gives you a lot of flexibility. Hybrid cloud gives you a lot of agility. At the same time, you also have to be realistic in terms of what are the things that you're giving up on? What are the things that you might not get in this context? Now, the good news is, it has been improving significantly in the last few years, and it's starting to get to a point where more and more applications can get to the cloud. But there is going to be a class of applications that will never move to the cloud because of compliance reasons, security reasons, IP considerations, all of these different things. But the key here is, are you thinking about it? What is your objective? Are you planning for these different things that you are going to be able to do? And are you realistic? That's really the main thing that you have to think about when you talk about hybrid cloud.
And are there any more best practices? I mean, what are the best strategies or maybe tools that you would recommend for mitigating this complexity while still leveraging the benefits of hybrid cloud?
I think the tools are always things. You have to kind of learn from other people's experience. You don't want to go there and figure out everything yourself. The good news is there are so many people that have already done this. And the key thing is to understand what are the experiences that people will have when you move applications between on-prem and the cloud. That's something that you have to think about. What applications are more apt for the cloud? And how are we thinking about it from the process of continuously keeping up the updates of the different applications and so forth? I think if you can't think about it, the good news is the different level of microservices architectures that are available now make it easier for people to be able to adapt some of these things. Now, you can't take an application that is legacy and then stick it into the cloud and expect the same outcomes in this context. And I think that's where the planning part of it's required, what we want, how do you want the customer experience to be, how are you going to support it? All of that stuff has to be planned. I think the best practice is really about planning, making sure that you're thinking about it. And at the same time, the most common thing that I also hear from customers is the cost. People have a very different perspective on what the cost is. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there is expectations that cloud is going to be cheaper for everything. Maybe it is cheaper for certain instances, and maybe it is not for certain other reasons. And that's where you have to kind of analyze some of these things before.
Okay, we'll come back to cost in a moment. But first I want to ask you, could you maybe share an example? I mean, you talk to a lot of clients and a lot of CIOs and so on. So do you have an example where hybrid cloud implementation has really been successful?
I think you can probably give a lot of examples of different companies that have done this very well. I mean, I think the one thing that I think about is a lot of these customers have really adopted cloud in a hybrid environment in the context of how do I make sure that I can take some of these applications. A lot of them kind of do 50% in on-prem, 50% off-prem, and so forth. I'm not saying I'm using 50% as a marker. It could be any percentage there. I mean, a lot of companies have done very well of trying to move applications in the cloud, and I think one of the big examples that I see, Adobe has done a very good job of trying to do things from on-prem company to more of a SaaS company, and I'm pretty sure that they do a lot of things differently. I mean, that's just one example. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of examples of this thing, and I don't want to call there's not other people, but absolutely there's tons of people that have done this thing. But the key part of it is knowing what you're trying to do. What is your end game? What are the things that you're trying to get to? Every company is trying to do some of these things, and at relatively various parts of it, they're successful.
Okay, let's talk about a second dimension of complexity, and that's where complexity and security are directly linked to each other. And we know that increased complexity will also bring increased security risks. So could you talk a little bit about that, what that is, and what specific vulnerabilities that you see emerging nowadays?
I mean, every piece of data or every act that we do is now monitored. I mean, I think that's different ways of getting information that is going there. And I think we are constantly getting spam emails and being phishing happens and so forth. And I think we have to be aware of what the ramifications of some of these things, because at the end of the day, what we don't want to do is go in and start doing certain things within a corporate environment or in a controlled environment where it becomes the root of all things that will destroy your environment. I think that from that perspective, ransomware detection, proactive monitoring of some of these things, it's got to be a continuous way of thinking about it rather than, it's not a one-time thing. People think of it as like, okay, I did my security exercise one time and I'm done. No, that's not the case. Everything that we do has to be kind of looked at. That's where people have to be aware of what they're doing or not doing. I mean, it starts simple. I mean, we want to make sure that people are not clicking on things that they shouldn't be and not opening up links and so forth. That's a common example. But I think I've heard horror stories of people that have been duped multiple times in the same context, where how it is. It's become very, very, very classical in terms of how all of these things happen. And I think part of what we need to be thinking about is continuous improvement and continuous monitoring of what we are doing versus not, and constantly checking against baselines. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to keep up with the security things, because the environment is changing so much. It's becoming so sophisticated. I mean, it's just unbelievable how sophisticated it is that people are getting spammed out of it, and then simple things. And I mean, I'm not talking about people that are not even technology savvy. People that are technology savvy can still get into with a one wrong step. And I think we have to be constantly looking for ways to be able to plug these holes. And as applications are more divergent at this point of time, as innovation continues to happen, the number of gaping holes are also starting to show up more. And it's something that we have to be very conscious about. That's where the one thing that I will say in the context of security is you got to do continuous improvement, continuous analysis, continuous monitoring of all of these different things.
Yeah. Where do you see the role of Hitachi Vantara in there? Where are you helping your customers and addressing the need for enhanced security in mission critical applications?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of it is to do with the environment, especially as with Hitachi Vantara. A few things that we are doing. I mean, obviously, we are continuously looking for things to make sure that our SWAS, which is our base operating system, is ironclad, it is something that we are very proud of. The second is we are also looking at regulations like DORA and other things that come into play. How do we make sure that we have, it's not just engineering, this is also the whole process of the whole thing. That's where things like DORA and give us a lot more broader spectrum in this context. And the other part of it is U.S. Defense Department has also come up, or U.S. government has come up with regulations in terms of compliance. So we do a self-attestation process for those regulations. We are one of the very few companies that have done the self-attestation process for compliance to U.S. DoD regulations and so forth. So those are some of the examples that Hitachi is doing this. In addition to that, we work with other third-party companies as well as others to increase our overall cyber resiliency thing, initiatives within the company. Hitachi, as you know, Hitachi Vantara, as you know, is part of the broader Hitachi conglomerate, and we have a Hitachi security company as well, and we are working with some of those initiatives as well in terms of improving our overall cyber resiliency aspects of it, and that's something that we are very proud of. And I think at the end of the day, it's not one area; it's a multiple things that come into play. Yes, we have to start somewhere, and I think we have done a pretty good job of dealing with compliance regulations like DORA, dealing with government regulations with like the U.S. government compliance self-attestation and so forth. So continuously looking for ways to improve things.
Yeah, let's talk about money. I mean, cost management, we already mentioned that CIOs are really under constant pressure to manage their costs. Labor-wise, tools-wise, infrastructure-wise, where do you see the most significant cost drivers in IT today?
Human power. Labor is probably the biggest one, because it's, on one hand, we know there's a lot of talent that's out there, and the talent has to be nurtured, the talent has to be empowered, and you also have to make sure that people are given the time. I mean, there's one of the constant things that I will say is if there's one thing that people want more of, is time. So you want to be able to give them the freedom, you want to be able to give them the flexibility, but you have to empower them in that context. I think the biggest thing is technology can be created, the newer innovations are coming into play, but all of this is created by one thing, the human power. So the talent is the most important thing that we have to do, worry about or keep track of, and nurturing the talent, making sure that we have the right people, giving them the right environment. I mean, there's lots of debate that goes on in the industry right now in terms of, do we bring people to work 2 days, 5 days, whatever it is, right? I think it's not a question of there is no right or wrong answers in this. Everybody has a different perspective on some of these things. But the most important thing that we have to worry about is, how do you nurture talent? How do you make sure that they are empowered to be able to do the right thing? And how do you provide them the right environment to be able to create that innovation? That's really where most of the thing is. I mean, you know this and I know this. Most of the companies today spend their money on hiring good talent, but keeping them, making sure that they're happy, making them productive is all the things that we have to worry about. Because losing talent is going to be the one that sets us backwards. You can't afford to do that. And there's so much competition out there in terms of trying to hire new talent. And I think that's where we have to be very careful about making sure that we are spending the right amount of energies. I'm not saying that we should do everything that everybody's asking for, but finding that right balance is something that every company struggles with.
Now, if we talk about increasing complexity, of course, we need to beat that with bringing in more and more simplicity, right? I mean, simplicity is the solution to complexity. So, it's important that we build in simplicity in IT. How do you see that? How can we simplify infrastructure? And how can that help in cost management?
I mean, at the end of the day, in the past, everything was a siloed infrastructure, and people were essentially looking at operating it in their silos. That causes two problems. One is you're spending a lot of energy, money, and resources on creating a siloed infrastructure, and you're also trying to find people that can manage that infrastructure. But as the world has become more diverse, what we are trying to find out or do more of is, how can you consolidate diverse applications into a single infrastructure that can be used for different things? This is where we have to have an infrastructure that can be suitable for a diverse set of applications, diverse set of needs, diverse set of users. It's not always easy, but at the same time, the one thing that we, especially with the cloud environment that has given us, we've learned from this is, how can we get a set of infrastructure that that can be optimized for different applications and diverse set of needs and still be used for all of these things effectively while keeping the utilization higher, which means that you're not dealing with siloed infrastructure. It's a consolidated infrastructure that can meet all of these different demands, and that will help us drive costs down. Now, there are lots of intricacies and complexities associated with that, but that's really where a lot of the companies are spending their time and money on innovating in that space to make sure that they can continue to keep that infrastructure as rock solid as possible. Because the expectations for uptime of applications is only continuing to increase. 24/7, 365 is not just a term. It is becoming the need. It is its basic table stakes at this point of time. How do you keep that infrastructure going? I mean, at the same time, you have to constantly rev that infrastructure. This is the classic example. You got to keep the innovation thing going. You have to continue to modernize the infrastructure while not bringing down their applications. That's the key.
Yeah. Now, a term that comes back a lot if we talk about simplification or complexity of infrastructure is right-sizing. Right-sizing infrastructure. What does this term mean for you, and how are you helping organizations to optimize their resources?
At the end of the day, right-sizing means only one thing, right? At the end of the day, are we utilizing the infrastructure that is available? And what is the utilization in terms of that infrastructure? That's really the key. If you have you can always over-provision an infrastructure and keep adding additional things to it, but what happens is your cost goes up and your complexity goes up. Complexity is always going to be there to some degree. We have to find a way to simplify things, and that's where the right set of tools have to be. The key way to keep the right sizing part of it is, do we have enough buffer in the system to be able to deal with externalities that comes into play, the spikes that come into play? And that's where a lot of this is becoming more interesting, because as a service models have come into play. Instead of trying to deploy infrastructure in your own data center or as a CapEx model, as a service models help you with some level of flexibility. I'm operating at 60 to 70% or 80% of my normal infrastructure in normal times. There are times that spikes happen and so forth. During the spikes, I can kind of over-provision myself and bring it back to normal and so forth. That's where the as-a-service models, the pay-as-you-grow or pay-as-you-go, if you will, is something that has definitely become more useful. Some people are embracing that. Some people are not embracing that. But at the same time, I think right-sizing to a large degree comes back to, are you utilizing your infrastructure to the extent that it needs to be, leaving a little bit buffer for any externalities and so forth. And that's really what it is. That comes through some level of consolidation, through some level of monitoring constantly. And at the same time, this is not a one-time exercise, because people are going to throw in more and more different things, more and more needs into your system, into your IT infrastructure or other infrastructures. And we have to make sure that, are we able to deal with this sustained load, at the same time deal with externalities or spikes as they come across? But you don't want to overspend, you don't want to underspend, because if you underspend, you're going to find yourself bottleneck. That's lost opportunities or lost revenue to a large companies. But if you overspend, you're leaving money on the table. You got to find that right mix. So keeping that utilization at a very high rate and making sure that that's optimum based on your risk propensity of that business is really what we have to think about.
Okay, super. Now, you spend a lot of time with clients, but you're also still very much a product guy as well, I can imagine, and still an engineer in the core of what you do. So you have, and you're in a place where you can look a little bit in the future. I mean, if I would ask you the way forward, what is it if we look 5 years ahead into the future? Where do you see businesses evolving so that they can cope better with complexity?
I think people are going to essentially morph more to an as-a-service model more and more, because they want the agility, the flexibility. They don't want to be stuck with infrastructure that they cannot manage themselves. To the extent people want to focus on their core business. Compared to what it was 20 years ago, the one big thing that I'm seeing is companies are pivoting towards what is their core business. In the past, when they have a core business, they also build additional infrastructures and additional things that they want, even whether they want it, other functions that they might want or not want, but they think that they need. But at the same time, now everybody's kind of looking at, is this a function that I can use based off of what is out there? Mm-hmm. Is this something that I can leverage based on an as-a-service that's already exists and I'm paying for it, and so that I can focus on myself on my core business? At the end of the day, I think what is going to happen over the next 5 years, and again, this is just a crystal ball from my perspective, and
Sure.
Everybody has a different view on this. Here's how I think about it. People will look at what are the 5 things that they would want. They'll focus on this core business. The rest of it, they'll probably outsource it. When I say outsource it, to an as-a-service model or something along those lines, or a SaaS model that they'll subscribe to. That way they have the flexibility to be able to bring it down, grow, or at the same time move from different things and so forth. So they don't want to be tied to a single set of infrastructure. Reducing risk. You got to find a way to reduce risk. But I think they are also going to have to figure out, as I was talking about talent earlier, I think all of us have to figure out what is going to happen with talent in the next 5 years. Because the next generation is looking for different ways to do this. I mean, I think I'll give you my own personal example. My son who's a product manager is basically telling me, like, after 5 years, he wants to take some time off because he don't want to keep doing this thing. Everybody has a different goal in mind, and I think we are going to have to cater to generations like that. And that is going to be different in how companies have to think about talent. And maybe there will come a time that some of these functions will be even spliced or sliced between those things. It's hard for me to think about that beyond that.
Now we talked about talent, we talked about cloud, we talked about infrastructure, security, and maybe the last point I want to touch upon with you is data explosion. I mean, it seems like it's never going to stop, right? Data keeps on exploding and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What is the advice that you would give from where you see this coming to CIOs, to how they can manage the complexity of data explosion?
I think classification, categorization of data is going to become key, because I don't think people are going to be in a position to absorb everything that's coming at them. And I'll speak for myself. I mean, there's so much data coming at me that it's very hard to keep track of what data is where and so forth. We have to be in a position to categorize and classify some of these data. This is where, I mean, if you look at it from a technology perspective, the metadata is becoming extremely important in that context. With that, I can quickly search for it, I can quickly access it, I can quickly go back and use some keywords to be able to go find it and so forth. I think at the end of the day, knowing keeping that metadata and managing that metadata is going to help us deal with the larger explosion of data that comes across with. Because not every data is important and useful, but it's useful for something. It's useful as a statistic in some cases. And I think that's where keeping track of it, making sure that the right set of data is accessible for the right set of people. And that's where it is a quite complex problem. It's not a simple problem, but I think technology has kept pace with this thing. And I think that it is going to go only. But I think understanding what your data is, because data is the lifeblood at the end of the day, that's going to feed a lot of these companies. And I think we have to figure out understanding the data, what is the metadata associated with it, making sure that we classify some of these things, categorize all, because none of these data is going to be destroyed. Anything that I say is going to be kept for a long period of time. So you have to make sure that data is available and easily accessible, but at the same time, it has to be in a place where it is relevant. I mean, you don't want to keep it at the most expensive storage or most expensive infrastructure at all times. You have to figure out where this is. That's really where it's going to be.
Great. Jay, let's talk a little bit more about yourself. You're the general manager for the core storage platforms at Hitachi Vantara. Tell me a little bit what's fundamentally that role in the organization?
I mean, I'm responsible for managing the core storage business at Hitachi Vantara. I mean, the block business is the biggest business for us. I am responsible for the core platforms as well as the core block storage business. And as you know, a lot of the Fortune 100 companies and 500 companies have some amount of Hitachi storage, especially if they're mission critical applications. And that's not something that we can take lightly. Expanding the business, figuring out what to do, where are we going there. At the same time, we also have to ensure that we are modernizing ourselves in the next context of what's happening with AI, what's happening with security, what's happening with hybrid cloud, what's happening with software defined, all of that stuff. I'm providing that infrastructure for a lot of that. That's why it's called core storage platforms in that context.
Okay, and where do you spend most of your time? If you look at your weekly agendas, where is it that you spend time at?
I mean, I've been here only for the last 90 days or so, and initially I'm trying to understand what is the perspective and what is the feel of customers, partners, and in our own field in terms of where we are, what we are not. What are some of the things that are missing? What are the things that we are doing very well at? I mean, I have my assumptions and based on historical knowledge of what Hitachi has been doing, but at the same time trying to validate some of these things. And obviously, we are also talking to a bunch of folks in the external communities to understand perceptions of this thing. What are some of the things that do well, not that we can do better, and so forth. Content. I mean, the spirit is about continuous improvement. Today, I'm spending a lot of my time with the field and the customers, and at the same time, the engineering part of it. We're also driving some of our roadmaps in the next generation. How we take that to the next part of it. So, if you were to look at my day in the week, it varies a little bit. It's a little bit spotty. In the last month or so, I've been traveling quite a bit with being in front of customers in the field and the partners. Of course, there is also time that I spent with engineering and internal folks as well. Obviously, there's the whole go-to-market engine that we have to make sure. Getting the message out. I think that's one thing that we have to go figure out. I'm figuring it out. Hitachi, to me, is has got a very high reputation. At the same time, over the last few years, a lot of our competitors have come into play, and we are also trying to figure out how to keep that message out there, doing all the things. I mean, the thing is, you have to speak for yourself. You have to do your own, what do we stand for? What are the things? And we have to make sure that we're in front of them. Hitachi has not done a lot of mass marketing in the past, and rightfully so, and especially with Hitachi Vantara. And now we're trying to figure out what are the things that we have to do to keep our mind share in the customer context. So I'm spending a lot of time in that spot.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what kind of manager that you are. And I mean, what's your way of building successful teams?
I think at the end of the day, you want to earn trust and be credible. That's really what it comes back to. I mean, yes, when you're going and joining a new team, you have to essentially make sure that you're credible to them. You're bringing the right side of the voices. You're not just being a person that's coming and saying, do this, do that, or whatever. You're asking for feedback. You're constantly looking for what are the things that are on top of them. Because at the end of the day, I talked about people. I mean, people are the most important thing. I look for what are their strengths, what are the things that they can do, what are the things that they see as problems. You kind of aggregate some of these things and also go back and say, here are the things that we are going to do in this priority order and so forth. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to empower people. The only way you can get a lot of trust built is you have to give some to take some. And in this context, you have to be able to give them the space to be able to do what they want to do within that context. That's empowering people, supporting them, not surprising them. You don't want to be a dictator. You want to kind of be a person that can, what are your strengths? How do you make sure that you can grow them? That's really what you have to do. You have to be a mentor, friend, and a cheerleader for most of these people. If not, you're not going to gain that credibility or that trust. And when I look at my last 20 plus years as a manager, managing various different groups and various companies, I think I think of it as, can they trust me? And yes, you also have to make sure that you trust but verify when you ask them to do them. Are they doing the right thing? And once they have the credibility, you can let them loose. I mean, you can pretty much let them do what they have to do, kind of give them high-level direction. I don't like micromanaging. I don't want to tell people this is how you have to do it. This is the problem statement. Do we align on the problem statement? What is important? What is not important? Sometimes people also have trouble with managing what's their priorities and the time. And you kind of provide clear guidance in terms of what's important and what is not. Why is it important? And providing that context is extremely important. And then empower them. That's all. Let them loose.
Yeah. So in your 20 plus years of experience, what's the most difficult thing? Attracting people, motivating them, growing them, retaining them? Where's the secret of your success in building successful teams?
At the end of the day, you have to make sure that everybody has a different core strength. And you have to identify that strength of what is it that they are good at and how do you make them tick. Whatever they do, you want to make sure that they are the absolute best in whatever they do. You can't just expect people to just do everything, and some people are not great at everything. Me included. I'm good at certain things. I'm not great at other things. You got to figure out what you're good at. How do you make sure that you can grow that? As long as you don't have fatal flaws. If there are fatal flaws, that's a different conversation that you have to have. Are there areas that you're great at? Keep growing that, identifying that. Or your areas that you're weak at, and how do you make sure that you're not below the line in those things, because it becomes a fatal flaw at that point. Identifying that part of it is the most important thing. And at the same time, retention is something that comes in waves, right? Retention is a problem in certain times. Retention is not a problem in certain times. If you're doing interesting work, and most people don't leave their jobs if they have a good nurturing environment, good supporting manager or management chain, and people that can express themselves in a way that without being like, oh man, if I say this, am I going to be getting penalized? Ability to talk freely. Those are the kinds of things that you have to look at, and keeping that environment is really what I look for.
Yeah. You're not only a manager, but you're also a leader, right? I mean, you've been leading a quite big organization. So is there anything specific about your leadership style? And maybe another way to ask the question is, if I would go back to your previous companies and I would ask around, what do you think people will say about you when you're not there, when they talk about you?
I think the one thing that they will say is authentic and transparent. I mean, I'm not going to keep something in my head and then tell you something differently. I mean, I can't fake myself very well. I will say that. I think the most important thing is, can they build trust? I mean, a very trustworthy person, a very easy person to talk to, is those are the kinds of things that they'll say. I mean, at the end of the day, leader has to lead. You have to give them direction. You have to give them priorities. You have to give them what is the outcomes. You have to be outcome oriented in a large. I mean, a lot of activity happens, but at the same time, trying to get them to think about it in the context of driving outcomes, being transparent with them, making sure that they feel that they're supported, and building their trust. Those are the kinds of things that I would focus on, and that's really what leadership is all about. I mean, the other part of leadership is, I mean, in any company, you're going to get 10 different initiatives coming at you, and there's 100 things that you have to do. What is important? Prioritize, maniacally focus on those priorities is really what you have to get to. That's what leadership is all about. When you can do 100 things, not all of them well, that's not a great use of your time. Then you're not a leader. How do you do that right? How do you make sure that you prioritize in the 3 things or 5 things that you want to prioritize and do that very well? The other 95 things, okay, maybe you have to give up on certain things. Making that trade-off and making sure that people understand why the 5 things or 3 things or 1 thing that you're asking them to do is important. Getting that message clearly and articulating them is extremely important.
Okay. Now, I believe that some people have very specific characteristics, and their success comes from their personality. And you were so good to share your MBTI profile with us, and it's a good way to talk a little bit about your personality. So your MBTI personality type is INTJ, also known as the architect. So it's a personality type with introverted, intuitive thinking, and judging traits. And these are typically thoughtful tacticians that love perfecting the details of life and applying creativity and rationality to everything that they do. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of typical strengths of INTJ, and I want you to say, well, which one resonates with you, and can you give an example of why that is so? So, typical strengths for INTJs is that they're rational, they're informed, they're independent, they're determined, they're curious, and they're versatile. So which ones resonates, and please give an example of how that is.
I think determined is probably something that comes to mind for me. Yes, some of the other things that you said definitely is true about me, that maybe not as versatile, but at the same time, the other things that you said are absolutely true. I think in terms of determination, I think early on in my career, I did some engineering work, and I was an engineer I'm an engineer and did bunch of engineering, but at the same time, I was like determined after the first 3-4 years, I need to do more than engineering, because doing something at a very deep level was not appealing for me. And I was like, okay, I was determined to go off and do my MBA and go into a broader vision. I don't regret that at all. When I look back, that's probably the best decision I did, because if you tie me with a desk and a computer and say go code for the rest of their life, I'd probably be miserable. And I think that's a good way to think about it. And even the other parts of it is, I've been constantly evaluating what do I need to do and how do I grow. And I've been very lucky to have worked with some great mentors and friends and people that have taught me a lot of things. And I think I owe a lot to them from that perspective. But you have to be determined. What is it that you want to get out of it? And I think unless you're determined in that context, you're not going to get very far.
Okay. Now, every coin has 2 sides, right? So there's a positive side and there's potential weaknesses as well for INTJs. And potential weaknesses can be that they are sometimes arrogant, they're dismissive of emotions, they can be overly critical, they can be combative. So which one do you recognize in yourself, and how are you overcoming these weaknesses?
Yeah, dismissive of emotion is probably an area that I have to be a little bit more conscious about and improve. And I think I clearly, it's not like I'm dismissive about it. I'm fairly unemotional person for the most part. And I think people kind of look at it in some cases, okay, you don't have that empathy on this thing. But that's not always true. You have to have that empathy, especially when you're dealing with large teams and so forth. But sometimes it comes across that. and I think I have to figure out what to do in that context a little bit more. And I'm taking steps to kind of be a little bit more listening in these things. And you also said judgmental, right? Because you kind of start judging people in this. You have to be very careful because you don't want to quickly judge or quickly get into a situation where you kind of make decisions based on your judgment or your intuition, but you also have to look at facts. Facts are more important in this context, and I think that's an area I'm constantly evaluating myself and trying to improve myself upon.
Yeah, but judgmental also means that because most of the top leaders that I interview have a J, and they're not perceiving, but they're judgmental in the sense that they know what they want and then they go for it and they stick to it. And so I think that's one of the characteristics for true leaders. So another question for you, Jay, is do you have any personal mantra that you use if you have to take a difficult decision or that can help you, and how do you use it?
I mean, at the end of the day, what is right? What is wrong? I mean, at the end of the day, it comes back to right and wrong. And not everything is boiled down to right and wrong. Are you doing things for a common good that is going to be, what is your objective? You got to know what your objective is and what is right or what is wrong. And yes, there's always shades of gray in some of these things, but you have to look at it from the perspective of what is your objective and how are you going to get there and what it comes back to. I try to keep things simple. I cannot deal with complexity. I mean, so my mantra is as much as possible, break it down into smaller chunks. That way you can kind of segment it, make decisions based on that. Because if you try to do this as a holistic thing, yes, you have to look at the holistic picture. But if you take every dimension aspect of it, it gets complicated and too much of analysis happens. You have to do the right amount of analysis, but break it down into meaningful chunks. That makes it easier. My simple mantra is simplicity.
Let's talk a little bit more about, let's go one step deeper and talk about your core values. I mean, what is it that values that are important to you? You shared with us that you have, your wife is a school teacher, psychologist, you have a son, 25 years old, you already mentioned him, product manager. What is the values of your family? What is the values that you've passed on to your son?
There's only two things, three things, I would say three things. Whatever you do, put in the best effort. The outcome will happen. If you put in your best effort and you focus on that, you will get the right outcome. Second is, make sure that you treat people the way you want to be treated. Okay? Mm-hmm. Just like, that's a very simple thing. And then do the right thing. Those are the three things. It's simple. Mm-hmm. If you keep it that way, it's easy.
Okay. In your career, if you look back your last 20, 25 years, who are the people that you look up to and still look up to today, and who are the important mentors in your life?
Oh, I don't want to name names because too many people that I will miss, but I think there are a few people that I constantly go to when I kind of look at, when I'm in a fork where I have to make a decision or where I need some guidance and so forth. I constantly go to a set of people. There are some CEOs and others that I've worked with. I'm not going to mention names in this call or in this call. At the same time, I also go to my roots. I mean, at the end of the day, family is something that kind of gives me some guidance in some of these things because not everything is about money or professional growth. It's all about you as a person growing into what it is. And I think that makes you better. And from that perspective, I would just say this. I've been extremely lucky to have worked with the people that I've worked with. I mean, I can only stop. I mean, in every job that I've done, on every maybe why job. I mean, every year that I've probably interacted in my career, I've had the great fortune of working with some fantastic people, both from the perspective of what I learned from them from a professional perspective, both from a perspective of learning from a personal perspective, because at the end of the day, the root of it is, are you growing personally? If you don't go personally inward, it doesn't matter what you do on a professional level. You might be the best thing since sliced bread, but you're a jerk. That's not the right thing. So are you growing personally as well? And I think from that perspective, I can't just. It's a long list of people that I'll have to name, and I'm not going to go there.
Okay. Now, another way of looking back at your career, I mean, you've been very successful, and I'm sure to come to success, you have to make our failures. Could you maybe share with us what was one of your most brilliant failures and what you learned from it?
I think at the end of the day, you have to think about it from the perspective of when you talk about failures, there are different decisions that you made over time. Okay, in some cases, how you come across sort of takes people by what they think. You don't think about it at all. I'm like, okay, that's not what I'm tuned to, and so forth. And I think, could I have done some things differently with some of those things? I could have probably done that. And those are lessons that I've learned. Not from a professional perspective, I don't think I would probably call one or two things. Yes, there are projects that I've misfired on or completely gone in the wrong directions, and I've learned a lot from that perspective. That's on the professional side. But the more, I think I look at it from the perspective of personal side. Could I have had done certain things differently with certain people that I've not been now that close to? Possibly. Those are the learnings that I would say. It's on the personal side I would probably think about more than the professional side.
Yeah. Now, you already said that you were very lucky in your life, the way that you grew up and so on and so on. But if you have to pick one or two things of that, what's really the best thing that has ever happened to you in your life?
I think I would say that it all fell in place to a large degree, right? I mean, I can state it multiple times. At one point, I decided I'm going to walk away from my job because I had to take care of my father. My family completely supported me when I walked away from this thing. It was very early in my career, or at least roughly 20, 25 years ago in that context. And I did not have a lot of base to. I didn't know what the future held, but that was the best decision that I took because I'm still get my head on the pillow today. I can sleep because I did something right. And I think I did what I could with what I had at that point of time. That was the best decision I took. It was a personal decision. It's not a professional decision. But at the same time, that's something that I will say, you know what? I don't have any inhibitions on why I did what I did. And would I do it again? Absolutely.
Yeah. Any misfortunes that you could talk about? I mean, worst thing that has ever happened in your life and how you overcome it, what you learned from it?
I mean, misfortunes is like, I mean, everybody's life has a lot of things that happen into place. And I wouldn't call it a misfortune. Having missed a lot of things, having come and spent time in the US for the last 30 plus years. When I look back, I was like, okay, I have this family that I talked about earlier, right? In India, and that I can reach out to. I mean, have I spent a lot of time with them in the last 30 years? Probably not, because I've been so focused and determined on growing my career. When I look back at it, would I do it again? Yes, but at the same time, can I do this and this together? I don't know the answer to the question. I wouldn't call it a misfortune. Would I do something differently? That's how I would think about it.
Okay. Now, you're very focused on your work. I can see hardworking. It's in your DNA, as you explained. What is that you love doing outside of work?
Oh, I obviously love spending time with my family. And obviously, I have a dog. I spend a lot of time with the dog. I mean, weekends and evenings, you probably will see me on a hike with the dog somewhere. It's for beach, dog, and walks. Are my best thing. Alone, that's where you kind of think about what you did, what you didn't do, what can you do differently, and so forth. That's a time of self-reflection.
Okay. What is it that you would say is for yourself your greatest gift in life? What is it the gift that you have that makes you special?
I would say family is everything to me. I had the fortune of having a family that my parents gave to me, and that's something that's a blessing. And of course, the other thing that I would say from a professional perspective, I mean, I told you already, I've had the luxury of the luxury of working with some fantastic people, both on a professional perspective and a personal perspective that I learned from. And I can give you my top 100 people that I worked with that I learned something from. And that's a gift. That's a gift. Not everybody gets that opportunity. I've been so fortunate in that. I mean, that's something that I will absolutely be grateful for forever and ever.
Many young people, young professionals watch our videos as well, and they look up to people like you that have built quite a career. So what's the advice that you would give to these young potentials, young professionals that want to follow in your footsteps?
The only one thing that I say is be true to yourself. And be true to yourself. And what do I mean by that? You got to know, you got to think about what you want to be and how you want to grow up. And I think that's the most important thing in that context. And the rest of that stuff will follow through. What you do, which profession you get to, how are you going to get there, you'll get there. Don't try to be something that you're not, because you will be miserable forever and ever. And life is short, and all of us have to figure out what we want to do with that thing. And as long as you're true to yourself, what makes you happy? What is it that you want to do every morning when you wake up? What are the things that you're trying to get to? Focus on those things, do the right thing, and everything will fall in place. I mean, I know this sounds like a philosophical way of thinking about it, but it is true. At the end of the day, when you're old and you're sitting there thinking, what have I done, and look back, the only thing that you have to look back is, have you been honest with yourself? Are you being? Have you done what you wanted to do? And these are things I definitely learn every day.
We need to do what we like to do.
Absolutely.
What we're born to do. We'll find our passion.
Absolutely. Follow your passion.
Okay. And on that note, Jay, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the super interesting conversation. And I hope we can meet in person very soon. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and thanks for having me here.